Happy Friday. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I am David Mansuri, Service President CEO at SCORE, and excited to kick off our briefing this Friday afternoon. So just to get us started, really excited to have you with us, excited to present the data and trends that we see in the 2023-24 state TCAP results. And before we dig into the data, I just want to take a minute to share, importantly, why we believe that this kind of data is important, why we believe that data from the state's annual assessments, like TCAP, is a critical set of information and data for our state. So since SCORE was founded in 2009, using data to improve educational outcomes and student learning has really been a foundational priority for the organization. And as a state, Tennessee's really led the way on using data to inform teaching, learning, policymaking over the last 20 years. As you all know very well, our state measures and publicly reports out on student outcome data in K-12 education every year in most grades and subjects. We led the nation in funding higher education in a way that's informed by actual student data and student outcomes. K-12 teachers are receiving annual feedback on their performance, grounded in data on whether students are learning. We have powerful measures like TVOS that helps us understand whether teachers and schools are helping students meet or exceed expectations. And then finally, Tennessee's sitting on a robust, secure data system that allows us to understand how students are progressing from kindergarten through career and to see clearly which policies and practices are working. All these efforts that are really grounded in data have led to impressive improvements for students. As you all know, over the last 10, 15 years, we've been one of the fastest improving states in the nation in K-12 education. We've recovered faster than most other states from the impact of the pandemic on student learning, and we're building stronger pathways to great jobs for more Tennessee students, grounded in what data is showing us is important from an economic perspective. So data, accountability, commitment to data really gives all of us, advocates, practitioners, policymakers, confidence that the policies and investments that are being made in education are actually resulting in improvements in academic outcomes. And I think importantly, these efforts ground education improvement in actually what's good for students. Some of you may have seen recently, we released a piece called Measuring What Matters that really begins to outline why data and foundational policies like assessment, teacher evaluation have been so key to Tennessee's impressive improvements in student outcomes over the last 20 years. And while some recent legislative proposals have aimed to eliminate some of these critical data points, at SCORE, we really deeply believe that it's more important now than ever that we're recommitting to measuring outcomes in education and across different student groups and reporting those results transparently and publicly so that educators, policymakers, employers, families, taxpayers know whether education is working, and that we can also act more boldly in using data in both K-12 and in higher education to reorient our education system so that it's preparing every student for career life success. Data drives results, and we firmly believe at SCORE that central to the commitment to data and outcomes is a commitment to ensuring opportunity for every Tennessee student. So with that context, I think, and really in a way that hopefully connects very clearly to that commitment, I'm excited to turn it over to Alexis Parker, our Director of Data at SCORE, to share key trends and insights from this year's TCAP results. And again, a set of results and data that we think is really important in helping us understand how Tennessee students are progressing towards grade level expectations and ultimately towards readiness for college and for career. So with that, I will turn it over to Lexi to jump into the presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, David. Really appreciate that welcome for everyone on the call. Thanks to everyone who is joining us today. Really excited to dig in and share about some results and data trends that we're seeing on this year's 2024 TCAP assessment. So we'll start by just going over some overall trends, really digging into performance across grades 3 through 8 in ELA and math, with a couple of looks at science and social studies as well. And so across ELA and math, we can see that Tennessee students are continuing to grow year over year. In ELA, our state is now surpassing pre-pandemic performance, that kind of record high in 2019, by several points. You can see we're just about caught up in math, but not quite to where we were in 2019 prior to the pandemic. And so, as David mentioned, still really impressive recovering faster than many other states across the country, but still more work to do, acknowledging that proficiency rates across grades below 40% in math and ELA is not where we want to be for students. So still more work to do to increase those numbers. Next, we'll look at this is growth since 2021, so since those pandemic declines across grade level for both ELA and math. And you can see in ELA that fourth grade really stands out in terms of growth, and for math, seventh grade stands out. And so really promising results here that across grade levels, we're seeing on average 9 to 10 points of growth since 2021. Again, really fast recovery from those declines, and promising results that these student-focused policies being implemented, particularly in those early grades ELA, are paying off for students. So really promising results here. I do want to note really quickly that there is a Q&A function. We'll have time to answer questions towards the end of our calls, but as things come up and you have questions, feel free to go ahead and add those to the Q&A throughout the presentation, and we'll address those at the end of our conversation today. Looking at how students are growing across student groups, what you're seeing here is across each of our student groups, the point change in proficiency from 2021 to 2024. And so you can see here that while all of our students are growing and making positive progress, you can see that white and non-economically disadvantaged students are having a faster recovery compared to students who are historically underserved. And so what that means is that in many cases, a lot of our equity gaps between student groups have continued to grow or stay constant since those pandemic declines in 2021. So we are seeing these gaps continue to widen as this recovery is not happening equitably across all of our student groups. So next, we're going to look at specifically ELA performance. And so right here, you're looking at across student groups where we were in 2019 prior to the pandemic compared to where we are today in 2024 on most recent results. And you can see that across these student groups, students have recovered and are now exceeding pre-pandemic performance in ELA specifically. Really, really impressive that across student groups, we're seeing recovery and surpassing pre-pandemic performance. However, you can see some really significant gaps between these student groups where on average, for every 2 students who are white who are proficient, only 1 student is that are students of color. And so at roughly half the rate of proficiency there, we know that we really need to address those equity gaps across student groups. Now looking at math specifically, a really positive note here is that while we're seeing impressive proficiency growth, we are also seeing our lowest performance category, that below category, shrink at the same time. And so we're not just seeing students who were already pretty close to proficient kind of meeting that bar, but we're seeing students who were previously performing in the lowest performance category recover that learning and become in that either approaching or proficient category. So really promising results there that we are seeing these gaps continue to decline. Next, just want to highlight a couple of points related to science and social studies performance. Again, this is across grades 3 through 8. And so you can see here that in science, overall proficiency hit a record high of 44% this year, growing significantly since those 2021 declines. The same is true in social studies, a record high of nearly 45% in 2024, with strong growth since the pandemic. And social studies, importantly, did show a slight narrowing of equity gaps that is unique compared to other subjects, ELA, math, and science. We are seeing those gaps narrow just a little bit in social studies. So some promising results there, but still more work to be done. Also want to show a quick cut by student sex. And so we can see here that across subjects, in math, science, and social studies, male students are outperforming their female peers. However, in ELA, female students are at a higher performance level, and that is where you'll see the most noticeable gap between student sex. And so continuing to dig into this, but wanting to understand where there are differences by student sex in their performance on TCAP assessment. So continuing to dig into this to learn more. But we did see that these trends are consistent across high school as well and across each individual grade level. So whether you're looking at 3rd grade or 5th grade or 10th grade, these trends are consistent. So that was a quick overview of kind of broad trends. Now we'll dig in specifically to some data related to grade 3 early literacy. So looking at ELA rates here, now we're kind of looking at grade 3, grade 4, and grade 5 together, really thinking about the impact of those foundational literacy policies that have been put in place over the last several years. And so you can see that across grade levels, literacy rates are continuing to increase pretty significantly, on average about 10 or more points, with some really strong results, particularly for 4th grade, which is what we saw previously as well in that earlier slide on grade level increases. And so what that really signals is that these state level policies focused on increasing student literacy rates in those early grades are not just having that effect in 3rd grade, but they're continuing to compound and increase student proficiency as they move through those higher grades as well. So really, really important to acknowledge the effectiveness of those early literacy policies. Now, when we look by student groups, we do see, again, those equity gaps remaining pretty stark and not moving, or in some cases being wider than where they were prior to the pandemic in 2021. And so you can see here that this red line is all students, and then our blue and gray lines are specific race ethnicity categories. And so you can see here again that Black and Hispanic students' proficiency is roughly half the rate of white student proficiency. That is unacceptable. Again, less than 30% proficient of our students of color in the state is a real clear signal that this needs to be an area of focus moving forward. We're going to keep on moving into our grade 7 math performance now. And so again, thinking about grade 7 math, we know that 7th grade math performance is highly predictive of how students will perform in high school on in courses like algebra that are incredibly important for college preparedness. 7th grade is also the last year that all students are taking the exact same math course before students get into 8th grade, where some folks are taking Algebra 1 or Integrated Math 1. 7th grade allows us to get kind of a full look at that sample of students before they get put into more complex math courses. So first, looking at proficiency rates increasing, you can see that in 7th grade math, unique from the state, we are surpassing pre-pandemic performance. Really, really impressive. Again, 7th grade had the strongest growth over time compared to other grade levels, and now solidly ahead of pre-pandemic performance. But one thing I want to point out here is if we look at the red category up at the top here, that's that below category, we can see that our below category is still larger than it was prior to the pandemic. And so wanting to keep in mind, while yes, it's important that we're raising our proficiency rates, we need to make sure that our students who are struggling are being brought up at the same rate. Now, taking a similar look, but by student group, you can see that for students of color and economically disadvantaged students, that is that ED or non-ED is economically disadvantaged, they're scoring below at double the rate of their white or non-economically disadvantaged peers. And so again, you can see here that over a third of Black, Hispanic, and economically disadvantaged students are falling in that below category, and that there is significant work to do there to make sure that all of our students are catching up equitably and that we're closing gaps between student groups. Next, we will talk a little bit about high school English. I do want to flag that we do not yet have high school math results. This is a standard setting year, and so the Department of Education will be releasing those results in the fall after those standards have been set and those scores have been calibrated. So for today's presentation, we're going to focus on high school English 1 results to kind of understand how those ELA results look when students enter the high school space. So you can see here that the proficient category has continued to increase, surpassing where we were prior to the pandemic. That's really, really promising. And the below category is slightly smaller than where it was prior to the pandemic. So really, really important. However, again, I want to acknowledge that more than half of our high schoolers in Tennessee are not proficient in English, which at that point, students are thinking about post-secondary and whether or not they're college ready. And we know that we have to do more to make sure our students are set up for success in post-secondary and career. Looking at this by student group now, we can see that gaps look very similar to that slide that I showed you at the beginning for 3 through 8 ELA as well. And so what we're seeing is that despite pretty impressive growth across groups, gaps are not equitably closing. And so you can see here again that proficiency rates are roughly half that of peers, particularly looking at economically disadvantaged versus non-economically disadvantaged. Here's some pretty significant gaps. Great. So now we're going to spend some time spotlighting some promising districts across the state. Again, feel free to continue dropping in questions in the Q&A feature as you have them. But we'll take some time now to spotlight districts who are really serving students effectively, particularly economically disadvantaged students, in terms of growth, proficiency, and gap closure. And so we'll spend some time digging into this. So there's a lot on this slide. Let me talk you through it. And so here we're looking at districts who are surpassing pre-pandemic proficiency rates and serve an above average ED student population. So that's economically disadvantaged. And so our y-axis here, that is this bar on the left that says economically disadvantaged student enrollment. That is the percentage of economically disadvantaged students that district is serving. And so that is going to stay consistent across each of these slides that I'm going to show you, where we're setting the bar at 30% here in the bottom left-hand quarter. That 30% is the state average economically disadvantaged population. So any district at 30% or higher is serving a larger than average population of economically disadvantaged students. And so wanting to use that as kind of our bar for the districts that we're spotlighting here, or districts that are serving a larger proportion of these students. And now what you're seeing on these charts, our y-axis here, our overall proficiency, is how many points they have surpassed their pre-pandemic proficiency rates. And so for this, we are looking at districts who are 10 points or more above where they were in 2019. And so you can see here, Van Buren and Trenton both stand out across both grade 3 ELA and grade 7 math in very significant recovery from those pre-pandemic rates and surpassing those 2019 proficiency rates. I want to give some time to kind of look at this, digest what we're looking at here. So I'll just give a brief pause. Again, feel free to drop questions in the Q&A. But we're looking here at districts that are surpassing pre-pandemic rates and are serving a higher proficiency of economically disadvantaged students. So now the next cut that we're going to look at is on that piece related to reducing gaps between student groups. And so here we can see that y-axis, that enrollment, that student population looks exactly the same. These are districts who are serving a larger than average economically disadvantaged population. Our x-axis here is how much that gap between economically disadvantaged and non-economically disadvantaged students has narrowed since 2022. So across the state in 2022, we saw that gaps widened really dramatically. So we wanted to use this point in time to see where districts had narrowed gaps between student groups. And so you can see here that on the left is a little bit smaller, 0 to 7 points here. And then as we move across to the right side of these charts, you're seeing very large narrowing of gaps. Polk for grade 3 ELA, reducing this gap by 25 points in 2 years. So some really, really impressive gap closure across the board here. And you'll notice that on these charts, just about every district on one chart is also present on the other. So really impressive consistency across these districts for reducing gaps by economic status across grades and subjects. Again, I'll give some time to kind of look at this a little bit more, take it in. Really great question popping up in the chat right now related to district size. So do want to highlight the fact that right now this is not controlled for district size. So really, really interesting to think about how in some districts, this may be the result of a small group of teachers really making an impact on student groups, whereas in larger districts, this is showing a really strong effort across the staff. Great. Our final slide that we're going to look at here is kind of our highest bar of performance. And so we're looking at standout districts for high economically disadvantaged student proficiency. Again, our enrollment y-axis hasn't changed. It's the exact same. But now we're looking at economically disadvantaged student proficiency. And these are districts who are surpassing the state average for all student proficiency. And so in grade 3 ELA, our state level proficiency is 41% for all students. And so these are districts where they're economically disadvantaged students. Oh, sorry, light went off in here. Where they're economically disadvantaged students are surpassing that statewide average for all students. So really, really impressive results here for the economically disadvantaged student populations in these districts. And so again, you're seeing Van Buren pop up on another one of these charts and across both grade 3 ELA and grade 7 math. In grade 7 math, our state proficiency level is right about 35%. And so you're seeing districts who are exceeding that overall student proficiency level for their economically disadvantaged students. We'll just give another minute to look at these, digest these. For our final few minutes before we go to our Q&A, I will go ahead and share a couple of high-level trends on the state's public charter sector. So we're going to be looking at districts that have public charter students or public charter schools compared to other schools in their districts. And so again, in the state of Tennessee right now, the districts who are included in this analysis are Metro Nashville Public Schools, Memphis Shelby County Schools, Knoxville, Hamilton County Schools, and the Public Charter Commission. So those are the districts that we're going to be looking at for these next few slides. The Achievement School District is not included in today's analysis of public charter sector. So similar to what I showed for the state overall, here we're looking at how the public charter sector has rebounded from the pandemic. And so you can see that in very similar to what we saw at the state level, ELA is surpassing that pre-pandemic performance. In math, we're just about caught up, but not quite there. So very similar to what we're seeing across the entire state here in terms of academic recovery from the pandemic, and really strong growth over time, as you can see. So now we're going to be looking at overall proficiency of students for charters, again, in those districts that I just talked about, compared to non-charters. So again, non-charters refers to the district-run schools in those districts that have public charters. And then we have our state overall as that gray bar. And so you can see here, when we're looking at overall student performance, our charter sector is lagging behind both their non-charter peers as well as the state proficiency overall. And so really important to acknowledge that overall proficiency rate has not quite caught up to where we are as a state overall. But however, there is some really promising performance, particularly for historically disadvantaged student groups, including Black, Hispanic, and Native American students and economically disadvantaged students that attend these public charter schools. Also want to acknowledge here that our public charter schools do serve a majority of students coming from both of these backgrounds. And so really promising that they are serving the majority of their student population well. And so you can see here that for Black, Hispanic, and Native American students and economically disadvantaged students, our public charters are surpassing their district peers and much closer to the state average compared to that previous slide we looked at. And so what that's signaling as well is that the equity gaps in our charter schools are much smaller. However, the proficiency rates overall still have significant room to grow. As we can see here, proficiency rates across these groups is at a quarter of students or less, which is not where we want to be. And so just want to share some quick highlights across those public charter sector. Again, feel free to drop questions in the chat as you have them in that Q&A feature. Some key takeaways here before we move into our Q&A are that students across Tennessee are continuing to recover and show really promising growth post-pandemic, and in many cases are surpassing that pre-pandemic performance or just about caught up to for the case of math. But equity gaps between our student groups are still very significant and persistent over time. They have not meaningfully narrowed since 2021. However, there are districts across the state that are showing some really promising results in terms of closing these equity gaps. And finally, assessment continues to be a really critical tool to understand how our students are being served and allowing us to look at these gaps in a transparent way and understand where we need to continue to improve how we serve students across the state. Okay, great. Thank you so much. I will now move to our Q&A portion of today's conversation. So please feel free to drop questions. For those who are not able to stay longer than the 30-minute mark, thank you so much for joining us today. I really, really appreciate it. But for folks who want to stick around for the Q&A, feel free. I'll give just a minute to for folks to drop those questions in the chat. Right, so I'm seeing a question related to the ED population compared to our charters and our districts overall. And so I'll go ahead and move back to this slide to answer this question. And so when we're looking at these two blue bars in particular, the ED population in charters and their charter districts is very comparable. It's slightly higher in charters, but very, very similar given that these are our large urban districts across the state. Our statewide ED population is a little bit smaller at about 30%, whereas in our charters and non-charters, it's closer to about half the student population, but that varies a bit by district. So very comparable ED populations there. Okay, I'm not seeing any additional questions pop up in the Q&A. So we can go ahead and conclude our webinar for today. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about the data we shared today. You will receive a follow-up email on Monday morning that includes the recording of today's webinar, as well as the full slide deck of information that was shared today. But happy to talk further. If there's another friend or colleague that you wanted to share this data with, let me know. I'm happy to set up a further briefing. But otherwise, I hope everyone has a great rest of their day and a great weekend. Thank you so much and appreciate your time today.